What kind of father sells his own daughter like cattle? And what kind of man steps forward from the shadows to save a girl the whole town called cursed? The storm rolled in the moment she collapsed at his doorstep. Mud covered her boots. Torn lace clung to her small frame. A bruised hand held a rusted wedding ring she refused to wear. Willa Braithwaite had run until her lungs burned and her legs nearly gave out. Now she lay in the dirt at the feet of the one man she had never met, but somehow trusted in the last moment before darkness took her. Jed Boon stared down at her in the pouring rain. He had seen broken folks before, but never like this. Not a girl with eyes full of terror and a silence that felt heavier than thunder. She was not running from a man. She was running from a sale. A sale that should never have happened. Jed's rifle leaned by the door, but he didn't reach for it. Instead, he stepped aside and let her inside as the wind screamed behind her like the devil was chasing her. He should have closed the door and walked away. He should have minded his own quiet life like he always did. But something in her face grabbed the part of his heart he thought he buried with his wife years ago. While she lay on the small cot inside his ranch house, her chest rising in shallow breaths, Jed wondered who she was, what she had suffered, and why anyone would want to hurt a girl who looked like she had already survived too much. He didn't ask questions. He simply placed a blanket over her shoulders and lit the fire. Claystone was a small town eaten alive by dust and judgment. People talked more than they breathed. They whispered about that girl long before she ever ran. Willa Braithwaite, the silent daughter. The cursed one. The girl with the limp. The one born without hearing. She tried to live quietly, but in Claystone, being different was as dangerous as carrying a loaded gun into church. She had grown up in a house with chipped paint and broken shutters. Her mother scowled at her. Her father ignored her, unless he needed chores done. Willa had learned to speak with her hands. Quick, delicate signs no one bothered to understand. She felt the world through silence, through small movements, through fear. The town never tried to know her. They pushed her away like she carried illness. Her father began meeting men behind closed doors. Men with clean boots and money in their pockets. Men who looked at Willa the same way they looked at livestock. She found letters in the kindling pile, with words she didn't understand, but enough to fill her with cold dread. Bride price, transfer, arrangement. Then came the cream-colored dress. Her mother tossed it on the bed and walked out. No comfort, no explanation, no goodbye. Willa packed that night, just her journal, a knife, and boots worn thin. She slipped out the window before sunrise. She limped through empty fields, dragging her bad leg, pushing through hunger and cold. She walked for days until she found a ranch tucked between the hills, smoke rising slow from the chimney. Jed stood on the porch, the brim of his hat casting shadow over his steady eyes. Willa took 3 steps toward him and fell. The ring rolled out of her hand and landed in the dirt. He didn't ask where she came from. He didn't ask why she ran. He only opened the door and carried her inside. When she woke in his ranch house, the first thing she saw was a fire glowing warm against the wood walls. Jed stood at the stove frying eggs. He didn't speak. He placed a plate in front of her with a quiet nod. She watched him warily, waiting for the rough hands and harsh orders she was used to. They didn't come. He pointed to himself. Jed. Then to her food. Eat. She understood. Willa stayed in the spare room. She moved slow, careful, her limp worse from days of running. Jed didn't press her. He didn't demand answers. He simply made room for her in his quiet world. She brushed the horses when she could. She fed the chickens. She sat on the porch during sunsets, a blanket around her shoulders, her eyes soft but tired. Jed lived alone for almost 10 years after losing his wife. He hid from the world, choosing silence over heartache. But now silence had a shape. A girl who didn't flinch. A girl whose hands told stories her lips never could. A girl who sat across his table and made him wonder when his cabin stopped feeling like a tomb and began feeling like a home. He started learning her language. Slowly, clumsily. She signed her name for him. Willa. He got it wrong 3 times. She smiled the 4th time. But Claystone didn't stay quiet. Whispers spread. The cursed girl was living with Jed Boon. The sheriff showed up with questions. Jed answered none. Still, trouble stirred, and it arrived one evening. Willa wandered toward the edge of the ranch, her thoughts somewhere far. She didn't hear the wagon. She didn't hear the boots. She only felt the earth tremble. 2 men stepped out. One in a fine coat. The same man who once waited to claim her like she was paid property. Harlan Sutter. He reached for her arm. She ran. Her limp slowed her, but fear pushed her faster. She stumbled toward the barn just as a single shot cracked through the air. Jed's rifle. Steady. Deadly. Ready. Harlan froze. Jed stepped forward, eyes cold. "Tell Braithwaite," Jed said, "next time you step foot here, you won't walk away." The men left fast. Willa stood shaking, tears slipping down her cheeks. She didn't need sound to feel the storm gathering around her. But for the first time, she wasn't facing it alone. What happens when the whole town decides a girl doesn't deserve freedom? What happens when the man who saved her becomes the one they all want to break? Snow came early that year, thick and heavy, weighing down roofs and hiding every footprint except the ones that mattered. Word spread faster than wildfire. Everyone knew Willa was at Jed Boon's ranch. Everyone knew she had run from a deal her father made. Everyone knew Harlan Sutter, a man with money and friends in high places, wasn't done claiming what he believed he bought. Trouble grew like weeds. At first it was whispers in the saloon. Then the general store refused to sell Jed feed. Someone slashed the wagon tires. Another night a rock shattered their window. The worst was the dead crow nailed to the barn door with a note written in shaky ink. "She belongs to him." Jed burned the note in the stove. The fire roared high, lighting the tight anger in his jaw. Willa watched him, worry twisting in her chest. She had brought danger to his doorstep, and she knew it. She moved quieter now. She slept lighter. Her drawing stopped. Her gentle smile vanished. She carried fear like it was stitched into her coat. Still, Jed stayed close. He kept the rifle by the door. He watched the road. He patched the broken window. He didn't speak much, but when he sat at the table across from her each night, the steady warmth in his eyes said the one thing she needed most. "You're safe here." One morning, Willa signed something firm and clear. "I won't hide forever." Jed didn't tell her no. He simply nodded and saddled the wagon. They were going into Claystone together. The main street went silent when they arrived. Willa walked with her chin up, though her hands trembled at her sides. Jed walked beside her, tall and guarded. Whispers rose, cruel ones. Boon picked up a stray. "Maybe he bought her cheaper? Hope he checked the return policy." Willa kept walking, but the words cut deep. Jed's hands curled into fists. Inside the general store, the air felt thick. Mrs. Gaines, the widow who loved gossip more than bread, stepped close to Willa and placed a gloved hand on her shoulder. "Oh, sweet girl," she cooed. "Your father is looking for you, says you were taken." Willa stiffened. Before she could react, Harlan Sutter stepped from behind a wagon outside. Clean boots, clean coat, filthy smile. "I've got the sheriff's permission now," he said calmly. "Took time, but the law's on my side." Jed stepped forward at once. "She's not going anywhere with you." But Sheriff Weller was already there, hat in hand, eyes tired. "They're saying she was taken against her will, Jed," he said. "This man has witnesses. They say she ain't," he hesitated, "right in the head. Says she needs her family." Willa signed fast, angry, desperate. "I don't belong to anyone." But the sheriff didn't even look. No one did. 3 men grabbed Jed before he could swing. Willa reached for him, her scarf slipping off. She fell to the ground as they dragged her back. Snowflakes hit her lashes. Her hands scraped the dirt. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came. Her panic stayed trapped behind her ribs. They pulled her toward the wagon like she was a prisoner, not a person. Jed roared her name. Willa tried to get to him, tried to claw toward him through the snow. But the wagon doors slammed shut. Claystone watched from their windows as the wheels rolled away, taking her into the cold, with no one to stop it. They locked her in the old bracket house, a rotting place on the far edge of town. No light, no warmth, no escape. A holding pen men used for things no one dared speak of. Willa refused food, refused to cry. When Harlan came into the room holding keys like he owned her future, she signed at him with every ounce of rage inside her. He laughed in her face. When he reached for her cheek, she bit him hard enough to draw blood. The next night she escaped through a loose board in the cellar. Snow was deep. Cold tore into her bones. Every step felt like fire in her leg. She made it to the creek before her strength failed. She sank into the snow, breath thin, vision dimmed. Maybe this was how her story ended. No noise, no chance, no choice. But Jed Boon was not done. He had spent the night searching every trail, every barn, every ditch. He threatened men who wouldn't talk. He kicked down doors. He followed footprints through the storm until he found her curled like a fallen bird beside the frozen creek. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. He scooped her into his arms, wrapped her in his coat, and carried her home through the snow. The fire burned all night. Jed fed her soup with shaking hands. He warmed her fingers between his palms. He didn't sleep once. When her eyes opened at last, she saw him sitting beside her, tired but steady. She signed slowly. "Why?" Jed rested his hand gently over hers. His voice was rough but honest. "Because you're worth it." The next morning, Jed hung a lock on the gate, not to keep her in, to keep the world out. He found an old book on sign language and set it on the table. Not as a command, as a promise. When she finally walked outside again, he offered his arm. Not as a guard, not as a master, as a partner. She took it with trust she had never given anyone before. But trouble wasn't finished with them yet. And the next man coming toward Claystone carried a badge, a temper, and orders from far beyond their quiet town. What happens when a girl who was once treated like property finally stands up and claims her own life? And what happens when the man who saved her is forced to choose between running from his past or building a future with her? The snow melted slow that year, but the trouble melted even slower. After Willa returned to Jed's ranch, they found a kind of peace that felt almost new. She left her boots by the hearth. She brushed the horses with a soft smile. She signed her jokes, and Jed tried to learn each one. Clumsy but willing, they grew closer in the small, quiet ways that matter the most. Sharing morning coffee, touching hands by accident, and not pulling away. Laughing when Jed tried to say her name in sign and got it wrong 3 times. The 4th time she smiled so wide it stayed with him all day. She rode Jed's stubborn mare, Dolly, and fell once into a puddle. Jed panicked and rushed over, but Willa flicked snow at him and signed, "I'm fine." "Your face looks funny when you worry." Jed laughed, a sound that hadn't lived in him for years. He carved her small wooden horses. She drew pictures of the ranch the way she wished it could be, bigger, brighter, filled with life. And slowly, the darkness that once clung to her began to loosen. But the world doesn't forget you just because you want it to. One warm April morning, a new rider came into town. Marshal Clay Donovan. A federal man with a silver badge and a smile that hid sharp edges. He rode straight to the sheriff. "I hear there's a girl up here," Donovan said. "One who caused quite a stir. Someone's pushing the judges to clean up these backwoods. They want property laws enforced, family claims protected." Sheriff Weller shifted uneasily. "She ain't property, Marshal. She's a survivor." "Well," Donovan replied, swinging off his horse, "then she won't mind answering a few questions." Jed spotted the rider long before he reached the ranch. He led Willa into the barn. "Stay here," he told her. She shook her head. "I won't hide." "I'm not asking you to hide," he said softly. "I'm asking you to trust me." She signed slowly, firmly. We face it together." Jed hesitated, then nodded. Marshal Donovan rode up with calm confidence, scanning every part of the ranch with curious eyes. "Jedediah Boon," the marshal said, tipping his hat. "Heard you've taken in a girl with a complicated past." Jed didn't speak. Willa stepped out from behind him, chin high. Hay clung to her hair, but her eyes didn't waver. She stood like someone who had survived a storm and was not afraid of another. She signed, clear and bold. "I am not a secret. I am not a prisoner. And I am not going back." The marshal blinked. "Well, sweetheart, that's real nice, but I don't speak hands." Jed stepped forward. "Then you're going to learn." What followed was not a shootout, not a fight. It was a battle of truth against lies. Willa wrote her story on paper with steady hands, every detail of the deal her father made, every fear, every escape. The judge read it. Jed delivered it himself to the courthouse, boots echoing on cold marble floors. Willa told her truth to the town. She stood outside the church after service and signed her whole story to anyone who would listen. Pastor James was the first to step forward. "That girl's braver than half the men I know," he said. "Leave her be." People softened. A woman left pie at their door. A farrier offered to teach her horseshoeing. Sheriff Weller tipped his hat each time he rode by, his eyes full of something like regret. Spring arrived early on Jed's land. They built a new stable together, wide and strong. Willa painted the mailbox. Jed planted wildflowers along the fence. When a foal was born late one night, Willa named her Ash. Jed smiled and said it was perfect. Life had finally begun to feel possible. Then came the letter, a thick envelope sealed in wax, addressed to Jed. His hands tightened around it before he even opened it. It was from his brother Daniel, a man he hadn't seen in 12 years. Daniel was dying. He wanted Jed to return and claim what was left of their family ranch back in Texas. 300 acres, a home full of memories Jed never wanted to face again. Willa watched him read the letter. Her heart thudded painfully. After a long silence, she signed, "If you go, will you come back?" He lifted his eyes to hers. "I won't go unless you come with me." The choice was hard. Leaving Claystone meant leaving safety, leaving the grave of Jed's wife, leaving everything familiar. But it also meant a fresh start, a future not built on fear. They packed slowly, sold what they didn't need, said goodbye to folks who had once shunned them but now hugged them in the general store. On the morning they left, Willa nailed a hand-painted sign to the porch. "We are not for sale." They rode out at sunrise. Jed held the reins. Willa sat beside him, scarf blowing in the warm wind. Behind them, the ranch faded. Ahead lay open land and hope. The months that followed were a new beginning. They rebuilt Daniel's ranch from the ground up. Willa learned the land. Jed trusted her with every part of it. They grew strong together, and their quiet love grew stronger than anything they had survived. One winter afternoon, Willa waited in the town square while Jed settled the final paperwork. She stood tall in her coat, hands in her pockets, watching snowflakes fall. The people around her no longer saw a cursed girl. They saw someone unbroken. Jed returned on horseback. He didn't walk to her right away. Instead, he faced the crowd. "I once left everything because it was built on a lie," he said. "But this," he looked at Willa, "this is something I built on truth, with my own hands, with her heart beside mine." Then he knelt in front of her. No ring, no show, just a man stripped down to honesty. "I already chose you," he said. "The question is, will you choose me too?" Quote. Willa felt tears fill her eyes. She knelt beside him, placed her hand to his cheek, and signed one word that held her whole heart. Home. They were married under the wide Texas sky. No grand ceremony, just Pastor James, a few neighbors, and the land that finally belonged to them both. A year later, their daughter was born. They named her Hope. And some say if you ride near their ranch at dawn, you can still see Willa leading her horse across the hills, her daughter in her arms, Jed riding just behind her. Not because he's slow, because he loves watching her lead.